My mother laughed at me, not behind my back, not quietly, out loud, in public. At a military ceremony with 500 people watching, she pointed at me and laughed and said I worked at a Navy desk somewhere. 43 minutes later, a three-star general stopped his speech, walked off the stage, and saluted me in front of every single one of those 500 people. And my mother's laugh died in her throat like a light going out. I had spent 27 years building something she never once asked about. 27 years of medals she never knew I earned. 27 years of being the daughter who did not quite count. What happened next changed everything. Not just for her. For me. For my brother. For a truth that had been buried under 3 decades of silence. Stay with me. Because this story is not just about rank or revenge or a single shocking moment on a parade ground. It is about something I believe you already know from the inside. What happens when the people who should have been proudest of you choose, again and again, to look the other way? And what it finally costs them when they run out of room to do it. This
That
story carries one simple truth worth 43 years of waiting to hear. Your worth does not require anyone's permission to exist, and the day you fully believe that is the day everything changes. Before we go any further, if you have ever felt unseen by the people who should have seen you first, I want you to hit that like button right now. Not for me. As a quiet signal to yourself that this one is worth your time. And if someone came to mind just now, someone who needs to hear a story like this, share this with them before the video ends. Sometimes, the most important thing we can do for someone we love is hand them a story that says, "You are not alone in this." Subscribe if you want more. I promise every story here is worth staying for. Now, let me tell you everything. I want to start with the laugh, not the salute, not the general. Not the moment that 500 people witnessed on a parade ground in California on a bright September morning. I want to start with the laugh. Because the laugh is where this story actually lives. The laugh is what this is really about. I was standing 15 feet from my mother at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. I was wearing my service dress blues. The gold braid on my sleeves caught the morning light, above my left breast pocket. A row of ribbons told the story of 27 years of military service. A Bronze Star, a Navy Distinguished Service Medal. Decorations earned in 4 oceans across 3 decades of work that I still cannot fully describe in public. My mother had her back to me. She was talking to a woman she had met 40 minutes earlier. Another family member at the ceremony. Another proud parent. They were bonding the way people do at military events. Shared nerves. Shared pride. The particular relief of knowing your child made it this far. And then my mother pointed at me. I saw the gesture before I heard the words. I did not need to hear the words. I had been watching this particular gesture my entire life. The slight wave of the hand. The dismissive tilt of the chin. The casual pointing that says, "That person over there is not the main event." But I heard the words anyway. My mother said, "Oh, that is just my daughter. She works at a Navy desk somewhere. Very sweet girl." She paused. And in that pause she found what she was really looking for. "But today," she said, "today is about my son." And she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncomfortable laugh. Not the laugh of someone who suspects they might be wrong about something important. It was a full, delighted, completely certain laugh. The laugh of a woman who has the world sorted out and is genuinely pleased with the arrangement. The other woman glanced over at me. Her eyes moved across my uniform the way people's eyes do when they are looking at symbols they have not been taught to read. She smiled politely. Then she looked away. My mother never looked at me at all. I was 48 years old. I was a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. I commanded the Pacific Fleet's Logistics and Operations Group, responsible for the readiness of thousands of sailors across 13 time zones. I had coordinated crisis responses in the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea. I had made decisions that kept hundreds of people alive when the margin for error was measured in minutes. And my mother was laughing about her daughter at the Navy desk. Here is what I need you to hold on to as I tell you the rest of this story. 43 minutes after that laugh, a three-star general would stop a military ceremony cold. He would walk off a platform in front of 500 people and salute me. The entire formation of new Navy SEALs, including my own brother, would snap to attention in my direction. And my mother's laugh would die in her throat like something that had finally run out of air. But I am not starting there. I am starting with the laugh. Because the salute was a moment. The laugh was 30 years. My name is Victoria Harmon. Everyone who knows me calls me Tori. I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia. I spent 27 years building one of the more decorated service records in the United States Navy. And for all of those 27 years, the two people who should have been most proud of me chose, in their own quiet and consistent way, not to look. This is the day that choice finally became impossible to maintain. I want you to stay with me. Because this story is not just about military rank or family drama or a single shocking moment on a parade ground. It is about something that I suspect some of you know from the inside. The specific exhaustion of performing excellence for people who have already decided where to point their attention. The particular loneliness of building something real in an empty theater, and the long, difficult, entirely necessary work of deciding that your worth does not require their permission to exist. This is that story. And it starts with the laugh. Before I take you to that ceremony, I need you to understand where I came from. Because a rear admiral does not appear out of thin air. The rank is built brick by brick, year by year, often in the dark, usually without applause, and frequently by people who stopped expecting any applause a long time ago. My father, Richard Harmon, was an electrician. He was a good man in the ways that mattered practically. He showed up for work. He paid his bills. He did not drink more than was socially acceptable. And he believed sincerely that he loved his family. He also carried, without ever examining them, a set of inherited beliefs about the world. The kind of beliefs that get passed down so quietly through generations that the people carrying them genuinely mistake them for common sense. My mother, Carol, worked part-time at a dental office and spent the rest of her considerable energy on what I can only describe as the public performance of being a good family. Church committees, neighborhood events, the careful maintenance of an image that was, in some ways, more real to her than the family underneath it. Then there was Jake. Jake was born 3 years after me, and the day he came home from the hospital, the gravity in our house shifted permanently. I was 7 years old. I remember holding him in the hospital room, this tiny red-faced thing, and feeling something change in the atmosphere around us. The way my mother looked at him was different from any way she had ever looked at me, softer, more complete. Like something she had been waiting for had finally arrived. My father had been raised in a world where sons carried the family name forward, and daughters were loved but not quite counted in the same way. He did not choose that belief consciously. It was simply the water he had always swum in. Having a daughter was wonderful. Having a son was continuation. I spent the next decade trying to be both. I played Little League. I earned Girl Scout badges. I brought home straight A's and put them on the refrigerator myself. Because if I waited for my parents to notice, the papers would stay in my backpack until summer. When I made the honor roll in 5th grade, my mother put my report card up for one day. Then she replaced it with a photo of Jake at t-ball practice. He was 4 years old. The helmet was 3 sizes too big. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you this because I want you to understand a decision I made somewhere around age 9. Without the words to name it at the time, if they would not see me for who I was. I would build someone so undeniable they would have no choice. What I did not know then, and what took me decades to fully understand, is that some people make a prior decision not to look. that no amount of building changes that. That the person doing the building is often the last one in the room to understand they have been given an unfair assignment. But I also did not know what that decision would make of me. At 17, I applied to the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. Not because anyone encouraged me. My father actually suggested community college. Something practical. I applied because I was looking for a world that measured worth objectively. A world where showing up, outperforming, and leading actually moved the needle. A world where no one had pre-decided who mattered most. I was accepted. Top 5% of applicants. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the letter arrived. My mother looked up from the stove and said, "That is nice." Honey, then she called Jake in from the yard to show me a drawing he had made. She put the drawing on the refrigerator. I framed my acceptance letter and hung it in my bedroom. I am not certain either of my parents noticed it before I left for Annapolis 2 months later. I want to pause here, because I think some of you are already tracking something familiar. Maybe it is not a Naval Academy acceptance letter. Maybe it is a promotion at work, or a degree, or a business you built from nothing, or a hard thing you survived that no one in your family asked about. The shape of the experience changes. The feeling underneath it does not. That feeling of performing in an empty theater. I know it well. And I know that if you are watching this, there is a reasonable chance you do too. I am not going to walk you through every deployment, every sleepless night in a command center, every decision that other people's lives depended on getting right. But I need you to understand what I built. Because what happened at that ceremony means nothing without it. Plebe year at the Naval Academy nearly broke me. It is designed to. They strip away everything you think you are until all that is left is what you are actually made of. What I was made of turned out to be stubbornness and a grief that had nowhere to go except forward. I graduated in the top 12% of my class. My parents drove up for the commissioning ceremony. Afterward, my father shook my hand and said he was proud of me. Then he checked his watch and said they needed to get back. Jake had a soccer tournament. I was 22 years old. Ensign Victoria Harmon, United States Navy. Still invisible to the two people who should have been my first audience. At 26, I was a lieutenant, commanding a logistics division aboard a destroyer. My fitness reports used phrases like performs at a level 2 ranks above current grade. I called home to share the news. My mother said, "Wonderful. Your father and I are watching Jake's college scrimmage. He might go varsity." At 31, I made lieutenant commander, ahead of schedule, assigned to Pacific Fleet staff in Hawaii, coordinating logistics for carrier strike groups. Real decisions, high stakes. The kind of operational work where a mistake in a spreadsheet can mean a ship cannot fight and sailors do not come home. I sent my parents a photo from my promotion ceremony. They texted back the following afternoon. The message read, "Congratulations. Are you still in Hawaii? Must be nice." At 34, I was awarded a Bronze Star. I need to stop here, because this one matters. The Bronze Star is awarded for heroic or meritorious service in connection with military operations. Mine was earned during a 72-hour operational crisis in the Persian Gulf. A carrier strike group's logistics chain had been compromised during a critical operational window. 400 sailors. Equipment and intelligence assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A situation deteriorating in real time with incomplete information coming in from multiple directions simultaneously. I made the decisions. I did not sleep for 3 days. I kept 400 people operational when a lesser officer would have lost them. The citation was classified, so I put the medal in a safe deposit box. There was no one at home to tell who would understand what it meant. When I called my parents that same week, my mother mentioned that Jake had just gotten engaged. My father said the wedding planning was already keeping them busy. I said congratulations and meant every word. I did not mention the medal. At 37, I made captain. 06, full command authority over a logistics support group spanning 3 bases. Hundreds of personnel, millions of dollars in equipment. I sent my parents a formal photo from the ceremony. My mother replied with 2 party emojis and a note about Jake's wife being pregnant. I want to be honest about what happened next, not to generate sympathy, but because I think this particular thing deserves to be said out loud. I stopped expecting anything different. Not consciously. Not with a dramatic decision or a tearful epiphany. I simply, gradually, across the span of about 2 years, stopped hoping. I redirected the energy I had been spending on wanting them to see me, and I put it entirely back into my work. And my work, in turn, became exceptional, maybe even remarkable. There is a version of this story where that outcome makes the neglect worth it, where I say, if they had seen me, I might not have pushed so hard. I might not have become this. I do not tell that version of the story, because it is not true, and it is not fair. Children should not have to be neglected into greatness. The achievement belongs to me. The wound also belongs to me. Those are 2 separate things, and mixing them up helps no one. At 45, I was selected for Rear Admiral, one of the youngest women in the history of the United States Navy to reach flag rank. The ceremony was at Pearl Harbor. The Pacific Fleet commander administered the oath. My new shoulder boards gleamed gold. That evening I called my parents. My mother said, "Oh, how wonderful. Admiral, is that higher than captain?" I closed my eyes. "Yes, Mom," I said quietly. "Admiral is higher than captain." "Well, good for you. Honey, did you hear that Jake is going to try out for SEAL selection?" We are just beside ourselves with excitement. After we hung up, I stood on my balcony and looked out at the Pacific Ocean. Somewhere out there were ships I helped keep supplied. Sailors whose lives depended on logistics chains I've managed every day. My parents knew I worked for the Navy. Beyond that, I was a vague shape in the background of Jake's more interesting life. I stood there for a long time. Then I went back inside and reviewed the next day's briefing materials. I could not tell this story honestly without telling you about Diane Walsh. Diane was 42 when she joined my staff as executive officer. She had grown up in Nashville, Tennessee, the middle child of 7, attended Vanderbilt on a scholarship, and earned her commission through ROTC. She had commanded 2 ships before she was assigned to work alongside me, and she was direct in the way that only people who had to fight for floor space at the dinner table ever really become. She understood what it meant to perform in spaces that were not designed for you. She understood the specific discipline required to prove yourself again and again to rooms that would have preferred someone else. She had her own version of the empty theater. We recognized something in each other during our first briefing. I do not know exactly what to call it. A shared fluency in managing the gap between what you are and what other people are willing to see. In 27 years of service, Diane Walsh was the first person who looked directly at me and chose to stay there. Not at my rank, not at my record, at not what I could do for her career. At me, at the actual person behind the uniform. She once said to me, "Tori, you speak to your staff like they are worth listening to, even when they are wrong. That is rarer than the medals." I did not know what to do with that. I thanked her professionally and changed the subject, which tells you something about how long I had been living without that kind of attention. About 6 weeks before Jake's graduation ceremony, she found me, sitting on the front steps of the administration building at Pearl Harbor. I was in my dress uniform. I was staring at the harbor, and I was not reviewing operational notes or thinking about fleet readiness. She sat down next to me without being invited. "How bad?" she said. "My mother called," I said. "She asked me to come to Jake's seal ceremony." She described it as the most important event our family has ever attended. Diane was quiet for a moment. "And you said yes," she said. I said yes. "Because you still hope." That landed somewhere uncomfortable. I said yes because Jake asked me. I said, "Jake has always been different from them." "Okay," she said. "But also because you still hope." I looked at her. I considered arguing. Then I looked back at the harbor. "Both," I said finally. "Probably both." She nodded. "That's fair. Both can be true." She paused. When you get back, and I mean the same day. Not 3 weeks from now after you have intellectually processed the whole thing into organized categories. You call me. Diane, same day. Tori, fine. I mean it. I said fine. She pointed at me. The Navy gave you a Bronze Star. The least I can do is answer the phone. That was Diane. The night before I flew to San Diego, I sat on the edge of my bed at 4:30 in the morning, not reviewing my schedule, not running logistics in my head, just sitting with something I had gotten very good at managing over the years. The Wanting, 48 years old, Rear Admiral, commanding operations across 13 time zones. And there was still, in some stubborn, unguarded corner of me, a 9-year-old girl who wanted her mother to look up from the stove and say, I see what you built. I know what it cost. I am proud of you. I sat with that for about 4 minutes. Then I stood up, put on my service dress blues, looked in the mirror at the woman looking back at me, and I said out loud, to her, you already did it, with or without them. I almost believed it. I flew to San Diego the next morning. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, California. September. The kind of morning that makes the state look like a postcard. Flat blue water. Salt air, the precise discipline of a military installation running at full ceremonial weight. I arrived early. I needed a few minutes to be an admiral before I became a daughter. I found my parents near the front of the family section. My mother wore a navy blue dress, which I noticed without saying anything. My father had on the charcoal suit he saved for weddings and formal occasions. They were both glowing with the particular pride of parents who have decided that their child's achievement reflects directly on them. They were talking to another couple when I approached. My mother turned, kissed my cheek without fully looking at me, and immediately turned back. This is our daughter, Victoria, she said to the couple beside her. She works with the Navy, too. Is that not something? Then, with a small, laughing breath. But our son, Jake. He is the one who is really doing something out there. The other woman glanced at my uniform and smiled politely. My father barely looked at me. His eyes were scanning the crowd for Jake. I found my seat. End of the row. The spot with the least useful sightline. Saved for me without any intention behind it. Simply without thinking, I sat down. Straightened my back, folded my hands in my lap. At 9 o'clock exactly the ceremony began. The base commander's remarks were efficient and respectful. Then he introduced the keynote speaker, General Douglas Garrett, 3-star, commander of Special Operations Command. I had met Garrett twice before, Tampa, Norfolk. Both times he had been precise and economical with his words. The kind of senior officer shaped by decades of making difficult decisions in places the public would never hear about. He took the platform. He spoke about sacrifice, about the standard that separated the men in that formation from the thousands who had tried the same path and been turned back. He was mid-sentence, discussing special operations across multiple theaters of conflict, when his eyes swept the crowd and stopped. He stopped mid-sentence. A murmur moved through the families around me. People noticed the pause. His gaze held steady on a point approximately 2 rows back from the front, slightly to the right of center, where I was sitting. He looked down at his notes, then back up. His expression shifted into something I had not seen on him before, recognition. And behind the recognition, the particular reflex of a senior officer who has just identified someone in a room who outranks the occasion. He leaned over to the base commander and said something quietly. The base commander's eyes moved to me. He nodded once. General Garrett stepped back from the microphone and walked off the platform. The murmur became something louder. Families exchanged confused looks. My mother grabbed my arm. What is happening? Is something wrong with Jake? I did not answer. I stood up. Because that is what you do when a 3-star general is walking towards you with purpose. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He came to a full salute. Admiral Harmon, he said. His voice was clear and deliberate, and it carried across the section. It is an honor to have you here. "Ma'am," I returned the salute. "General Garrett," for a moment. The parade ground went completely silent. Then, from the formation of new SEALs, a single hand snapped up. Then another. Then the entire formation, crisp, simultaneous. Every man facing in my direction with his right hand raised in salute. My brother Jake was in the third row. His hand was up. His eyes were wide. The officers in the civilian crowd came to attention. My father's hands went still on his camera. My mother's hand dropped from my arm. General Garrett returned to the microphone. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of acknowledging the presence of Rear Admiral Victoria Harmon, who commands the Pacific Fleet's Logistics and Operations Group. Admiral Harmon has served this nation with extraordinary distinction for 27 years. Her presence here honors these men and this ceremony." The applause that followed was not polite. It was sustained and genuine. The kind that comes from people who understand what rank costs to accumulate. I remained standing until Garrett gestured for the audience to sit. Then I lowered myself back into my seat. Posture unchanged. Expression neutral. My mother's mouth was open. My father was looking at me like he had never seen me before, which, in every way that mattered, was true. I need to tell you what happened next. Because it was not something I planned, and it was not something the general arranged. It happened on its own. Because sometimes the truth finds its own way into the room whether you invited it or not. While the families around us were still processing what they had just witnessed, a protocol officer quietly carried a small standing microphone to the edge of the ceremony platform. A woman in Navy working uniform followed him. She looked to be about 30 years old, brown eyes. The particular bearing of someone who has been through something serious and come out the other side with every unnecessary thing stripped away. She stepped up to the microphone. She said, "My name is Amy Kowalski, Petty Officer, First Class, United States Navy, 3 years ago. I was one of 214 sailors aboard the USS Resolute during a catastrophic equipment failure in the Pacific Ocean. We were taking on water. Communications were compromised. The window before our situation became unsurvivable was 47 minutes. She paused. The parade ground was silent. Admiral Harmon coordinated our emergency response from Pacific Fleet Command. In those 47 minutes, she made 17 major operational decisions. She rerouted assets that were not within standard range. She personally authorized a deviation from emergency protocol that would have delayed our rescue by 2 hours. And she accepted full personal responsibility for that deviation in writing, in real time, before anyone knew how it would turn out. Amy Kowalski looked directly at me. Every sailor on that ship is alive because of the decisions she made in less than an hour. I know this because I have read the complete incident report. I know this because I was the last sailor they pulled off that deck. Her voice held absolutely steady. I have never had the opportunity to say this publicly, so I am saying it now. Admiral Harmon, you saved my life. You saved all 214 of us, and I wanted your family to hear that. She stepped back from the microphone. In the silence that followed, I became aware that my mother was crying. Not quietly, not gracefully. She was crying the way people cry when something true has reached them all at once. When understanding arrives not gradually, but like a door coming off its hinges. I sat very still. The way I had learned to sit through the hardest moments of a 27-year career. But I will tell you the honest truth. I was close. I was very close to the edge of that composure. Not because of the general, and not because of the crowd, and not even because of Amy Kowalski standing at that microphone, but because Amy Kowalski was 30 years old, and she was standing in front of 500 people, and she was saying the thing that I had spent a lifetime not being able to say to the 2 people sitting 3 feet to my left. She was saying, "I see what she did. I know what it cost. It matters." I held myself together, because that is what I do. But I want you to know it cost me something. After the trident pins were presented, after Jake walked to the platform with the controlled steadiness of someone who has paid every cent for something, and refuses to be undone by the receiving of it. The families poured forward onto the parade ground. Jake reached me first. He grabbed me in a hug that communicated everything too large for words. He said into my shoulder, "You saved 214 people, and you never told me." 214 and counting, I said. Now let go before someone has to explain why a new SEAL is emotional at his own graduation. He laughed and stepped back. His eyes were red. My parents approached slowly. My mother moved like someone crossing ice. She was no longer certain would hold her weight. "Tori," she said, "we had no idea. We did not know you were an admiral. We did not understand you knew." "Mom," I kept my voice steady and clear. Not cold, not kind. Just accurate. "I told you when I was promoted 3 years ago. You asked if admiral was higher than captain. I did not understand what that meant." "You did not ask," I said. "There is a difference between not knowing and not asking. That difference matters." My father was standing just behind her. He was holding his camera in both hands, and he looked genuinely, quietly undone. Not the defensive collapse of someone who has been caught. The quieter kind. The kind that comes from understanding something you cannot unknow. "That young woman," he said. "Amy," she said, "you saved her life. 214 lives," I said gently. "And you never told us. You never asked what I did, Dad, for 27 years. You asked how Hawaii was. You commented on whether I was getting enough sun. You sent cards that said congratulations with nothing behind the word." He flinched. "We assumed you were fine," he said. "You always seemed so completely fine." "I learned to seem fine," I said. "It took about 15 years to become fluent in it." My mother reached for my hand. I let her hold it briefly. "We are so sorry." "Tori, I believe you," I said, "and I need you to hear something else." I looked at both of them. "Your apology is not the end of this. It is the beginning of something harder. Because now you have to do the actual work of learning who I am. Not who you decided I was at age 9. Who I actually am. What I do. Why it matters." I paused. "And one more thing. Jake has been carrying the weight of your expectations his entire life. He nearly did not make it through training. Not because his body failed him. Because the terror of disappointing you almost broke him before his body ever got the chance. The golden child is as damaged as the invisible one. Just differently. I need you to understand that." Jake, standing nearby, hearing this, looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 38 years of being his sister. Relief. Pure, exhausted. Decades overdue relief. Like someone had finally named the thing he had been carrying so long. He had started to believe it was just part of his own weight. I had a transport back to Pearl Harbor at 2 in the afternoon. I said my goodbyes. Not warm, not cold. Truthful. I told Jake I was proud of him. I told my parents I would be in touch when I was ready. And then I walked across that base in the September sunshine, alone in my service dress blues, with my head level and my posture exactly as it had been trained. I did not look back. But this time, and this is the part I need you to hear, it was not because I was protecting myself from something behind me. It was because I finally knew where I was going. I called Diane from the rental car on the way to the airport. She answered on the first ring. "Same day," she said. "I had faith in you." "Be quiet and let me talk," I said. She was quiet. For the entire 45-minute drive to the airport, I told her everything. The laugh at the beginning. General Garrett stepping off the platform. Amy Kowalski at the microphone. My father's hands on the camera. My mother's face when understanding arrived. Jake's expression when I said the thing about the golden child. When I finished, there was a pause. "How do you feel?" Diane asked. I thought about it honestly. Like something that has been clenched for 30 years just started to let go. Not all at once. One finger at a time, but some. "That is enough for today," she said. "It does not feel like winning." "No," she said. "Real things almost never feel like winning. They feel like true." 3 weeks after the ceremony, a package arrived at my office at Pearl Harbor. Inside was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were photographs. Every photograph I had ever sent my parents over the years. carefully gathered from wherever they had been stored or forgotten. My commissioning, each promotion ceremony, my change of command. They had been mounted in a small album, with captions written in my mother's handwriting. This is when Tori made lieutenant commander. This is her promotion to captain. This is the day she became an admiral. I sat with the album for a long time. Then I found something tucked inside the front cover. A separate note, in my father's handwriting. My father is not a man who writes notes. He is not a man who easily says the thing beneath the thing he is actually trying to say. So I want you to understand what it meant that this note existed at all. He wrote, Tori, I want you to know something I should have said out loud a long time ago. I have carried a photo of you in my wallet since your graduation from Annapolis, your commissioning photo. The one where you are in your white uniform and you look like you already know exactly what you are going to become. I have shown that photo to people at work, at the hardware store, waiting in lines. I have said more times than you will ever know. That is my daughter. She is in the Navy. I do not know why I could never say it to you directly. I think I was afraid of something I could not name. I am going to figure out what that is. I promise you, Dad, I sat with that note for a very long time. And here is what I finally understood. The love was always there. The failure was in the expression of it. That is a painful truth, and it is also a true truth. It needs to be called what it was, a failure, real, costly, and with consequences that spread across decades and shaped two people in ways they are still uncovering. But it also means there's something underneath the damage, some foundation, however buried. Maybe that was enough to build on. Maybe. My parents began seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Patricia Brennan, and she specialized in family dynamics. My mother described her as not afraid to tell you when you are being ridiculous, which told me, Doctor. Brennan was probably exactly right for the job. After their fourth session, my mother sent me a text. She wrote, Dr. Brennan asked me when I last asked you a question about your life. I could not remember a specific time. I am sorry. Tori, I am going to do better. It was not a performed apology. It was the quieter, more uncomfortable kind. The kind that comes from someone beginning to understand the actual shape of what they did. Jake called me every 2 weeks now. Real conversations. The kind where we told each other actual things about our actual lives, not the surface exchange we had managed for years. He told me, I have been in therapy too. I realized I have spent 10 years terrified that if I ever failed at anything, Mom and Dad would stop loving me. I thought I was just driven. Turns out I was just scared. That is not drive. I told him, that is fear wearing drive's clothing. Yeah, he said. Yeah, it really is. We were both in our 40s, learning who we were outside the roles our family had assigned us before we were old enough to consent to them. I was learning that I was allowed to need things. Jake was learning that he was allowed to not be perfect. Those are not small lessons. Those are enormous. Difficult, necessary ones. 7 months after the ceremony. My parents asked if they could visit. This time they called first. I said yes. We met at a restaurant in Honolulu. Neutral ground. Neither of us had the advantage. My mother had brought a small notebook. She opened it partway through lunch and showed it to me. It was filled with her handwriting, notes about Navy rank structure, questions about what a rear admiral actually does, diagrams she had drawn trying to understand the chain of command. I have been learning, she said. I do not understand all of it yet, but I am trying. My father said, when I read about what you manage every day, the scope of it, I keep thinking, how did we not know? How did we not ask? You did not ask, I said, because you had already decided where to look. That is the honest answer. He nodded. He did not argue. We set Jake up to feel like he always had to succeed, my mother said. And we set you up to feel like nothing you did would matter. Dr. Brennan helped us see that. We damaged both of you. Yes, I said simply. You did. The acknowledgement sat between us. Not angry, not tearful, just accurate and real. We finished lunch. I set some terms for the path forward. Visits once every 2 months, always with advance notice. No arriving unannounced. No discussing Jake unless I brought him up first. They agreed to every condition without negotiating. It was not trust. It was not forgiveness. It was not a warm embrace at the end of a movie where everything resolves in 2 minutes. It was a beginning. The honest, uncomfortable, adult kind of beginning. The kind that does not come with music, as we walk to our cars. A young sailor in civilian clothes recognized me. "Admiral Harmon," he said, coming to attention instinctively. "I just wanted to say thank you for approving my transfer request. My wife just had our baby, and being stationed closer to her family means everything to us." "You earned it," I said. "Congratulations." He nodded, glanced at my parents, and walked away. My mother watched him go. Then she looked at me. "That happens regularly," she said quietly. It was not a question. "Sometimes," I said. "You matter to them," my father said. "They respect you." "Yes," I said. "They do." He looked at the ground for a moment. "We should have been first," he said. I did not argue with that either, because he was right. They should have been first. 14 months after the ceremony at Coronado, I was selected for promotion to Vice Admiral. 3 stars. Diane brought me the news personally. She walked into my office with the expression she reserved for moments that actually mattered. "Short list," she said. "Vice Admiral. Confirmed this morning." I set down my pen. "How confident is your source?" "Confident enough that I am already mentally rearranging the seating chart for your ceremony." I looked at her for a moment. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I have been running for 30 years and I cannot quite tell whether I am crossing a finish line or just reaching the end of one course and the start of a longer one." "Both," she said. "It is always both." The promotion ceremony was held on a Friday morning at Pearl Harbor. I invited my command staff, my senior officers, my senior enlisted leaders, every person who had served alongside me and, in doing so, helped make me the officer I became. I invited Amy Kowalski, who flew in from Norfolk. She sat in the third row with the quiet certainty that belongs to people who have been through real things. I invited Diane Walsh, who stood at my right side during the oath. And this time, for the first time, I invited my parents. They flew in from Charlottesville. My mother wore a dress with small anchors on it, which I found quietly moving and chose not to comment on. My father wore the charcoal suit, but he was holding himself differently, quieter, more careful. Like someone who had learned that the space he takes up in a room carries weight. When the 3-star boards were pinned to my shoulders and the fleet commander stepped back, when the crowd applauded, I looked out at the faces in front of me. Amy Kowalski, clapping with her whole body. Diane Walsh, not clapping, but watching me with that expression I had learned to recognize, which said, "There you are." My brother Jake, in his SEAL uniform, giving me the look that only siblings can exchange across a room and across a lifetime. We made it. My father, hands shaking as he clapped, his face completely open in a way I had never seen it. Not the proud performed face he wore at Jake's games or Jake's wedding. Something rawer. Something that looked, for the first time in my life, like he was actually seeing me. My mother, tears running freely, not trying to stop them. I thought about the girl in the childhood bedroom in Charlottesville, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering what was wrong with her. Nothing was ever wrong with her. It just took the right people a very long time to say so. And some of those people, imperfect and late and genuinely trying, were sitting in the 4th row. That is not nothing. Now I want to step out of the story and speak to you directly, because I think some of you have been watching this and recognizing something that has nothing to do with military rank. Maybe you are the daughter in a family that built its narrative around someone else. Maybe you are the person at work whose ideas get credited to someone louder. Maybe you are the one who learned, very young, to perform excellence in an empty theater, and got so good at it that you started to lose track of whether you still needed an audience at all. Here is what I know now that I wish I had known at 30. First, the need to be seen is not weakness. Research in developmental psychology shows that being accurately witnessed by the people who love you is a fundamental human need, not a preference. When that need goes unmet for long enough, children do not simply adjust. They adapt in ways that follow them into adulthood. Naming that clearly is not self-pity. It is the first honest step. Second, building extraordinary things in an attempt to earn withheld love is a survival strategy, not a character flaw. I am proud of my career. I am proud of what I built and what it protected and who it served. But I built some of it in the shadow of a hope that was never realized. Acknowledging the shadow does not diminish the building. It just tells the truth about where I started. Third, boundaries are not punishment. They are architecture. When I told my parents that any path forward would happen on my terms and my timeline, I was not withholding love. I was building a structure inside which something real might eventually grow. Family therapists consistently describe boundary setting by the overlooked person as one of the most important factors in whether genuine repair becomes possible. Fourth, one person who truly sees you can change the trajectory of your life. Diane Walsh sat on those steps. She answered the phone the same day. She told me difficult things because she respected me enough not to protect me from accuracy. Research in interpersonal neuroscience shows that consistent, attuned relationships in adulthood can genuinely repair pathways damaged by earlier emotional neglect. Not simulate the repair, actually repair it. If you have someone like Diane in your life, tell them what that means. And if you are that person for someone else, understand that what you are doing cannot be measured and cannot be repaid. Fifth, and this is the one I most want you to hold, my parents were not monsters. I need to say that plainly. It would be a simpler story if they were. They were limited people who passed on the limitations of the people who raised them, the way all limited people do when they move through life without stopping to examine what they are carrying. My father did not invent the belief that sons were the primary legacy of a man. He received it. He was shaped by it so completely that he confused it with common sense. That is not an excuse. The harm was real, and it spread across decades, and it shaped not just me, but my brother. The golden child who grew up so afraid of failing that he nearly broke under the pressure of his own mythologized potential. But understanding where something comes from is different from excusing it. Understanding gives you a choice that pure anger does not, the choice to decide, deliberately and with full awareness, what you are going to carry forward, and what you are finally going to set down. I set down the need for their validation the same season I put on 3 stars. It was the lighter load. I have been walking faster ever since. If any part of this story reached you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, was there a moment when you stopped performing and started building for yourself? Who is the person who finally saw you? And did you ever tell them what that meant? Because the stories we carry quietly, the ones we have been told are not dramatic enough or important enough to say out loud, are some of the most powerful ones that exist. When we finally speak them, we discover 100 people saying, "Yes, me too. I thought I was the only one." You were never the only one. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And to whoever is watching this from a place of exhaustion, from the weight of performing for people who have already decided where to look. You are not invisible to everyone. You are not invisible to me. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. This story is based on personal experience and has been adapted to protect privacy. Names and certain identifying details have been changed. The emotional truth is real. The psychological research referenced is drawn from published academic sources. If you are navigating the effects of family favoritism or emotional neglect, speaking with a licensed therapist is a meaningful and worthwhile step. Before I let you go, I want to stay here with you for just a little longer, because I think what just happened in this story deserves more than a summary. It deserves to be felt, and then it deserves to be carried somewhere useful. Here is what I have been sitting with since the day General Garrett walked off that stage. For 27 years, I performed excellence in a theater that was mostly empty. I earned medals I put in a box. I reached milestones I stopped announcing. I built a career that shaped the lives of thousands of people. And I did nearly all of it without the people at home ever understanding what I was doing or why it mattered. And here is the complicated truth. I became exceptional partly because of that emptiness. The discipline it required, the self-sufficiency it forced me to build. I am not grateful for the neglect, but I am honest about what I made from it. What I want you to take from this story is not a simple message about proving people wrong. That is too small. Proving people wrong keeps you tied to them. Your success becomes a reaction to their failure, and that means they are still setting the terms. What I want you to take from this is something quieter and harder and worth considerably more. Your work is real whether or not anyone witnesses it. Your contribution matters whether or not anyone names it. Your worth exists independently of whether the people who raised you were capable of seeing it clearly. Research in developmental psychology tells us that children who grow up without consistent emotional attunement from their parents do not simply get over it, they adapt. They find other ways to feel real, and those adaptations, the workaholism, the perfectionism, the emotional self-sufficiency that looks like strength from the outside, those are not character flaws. They are survival strategies. And the first step toward something healthier is simply naming them honestly. I also want to say something about the people who failed you, because I think it matters. My parents were not cruel people. They were limited people. They were shaped by their own inheritance of beliefs and blindnesses that they never stopped to examine. My father loved me. He carried my photograph in his wallet for 25 years and never once thought to say so out loud. That is not a monster. That is a person who never learned how to translate love into language. Understanding that does not erase the harm, but it changes what you do with it. It gives you the option to grieve what was lost without spending the rest of your life prosecuting people who were themselves never taught better. That option is worth taking when you are ready. And one last thing, the person who saves you will often not be who you expected. It was not my parents. It was not a dramatic public moment, though that moment arrived. It was a woman who sat down on some steps next to me without being invited and said, with complete simplicity, "I see who you are and I am paying attention. If you have someone like that in your life, please tell them today what it means. And if you are that person for someone else, please understand what you are actually doing. You are changing a life. Quietly, consistently, completely. That is not a small thing. That is everything." To every person watching this who has been performing in an empty theater, the theater was never the point. You were always the point. Go build something for yourself now. Not for them, not to prove anything to anyone. For you, because you are worth building for. I will see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves. And take care of each other. This content was researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team with one intention: to bring you stories that carry real meaning, real lessons, and real humanity. Every word in this video was chosen carefully and with respect for your time and your experience. We do not use automated scripts or artificial generation to tell these stories. We build them by hand, because we believe the stories that matter deserve to be handled that way. Thank you for watching. Thank you for trusting us with your time. And thank you for being part of a community that believes in the value of being truly seen.